Hi everyone and welcome. I'm going to use this video to talk a little bit about Module 2, the clarification, the curiosity questions that you asked there, that some of you asked. So I'll read them out and get answering to them. I don't think there's any matters arising this week. Something that I may not have mentioned last week is those videos at the very bottom. I think I might have mentioned those. Have a look at them. They'll be useful for realism and liberalism, which we're going to next. Liberalism we're going to next. Somewhat useful, and they'll help introduce you to the readings. The other thing is Slack. Slack is for you if you need to get hold of me. I might be on Slack every now and again, but email me. Okay, so with that done, let me get straight onto the questions then. And I have these. So I have, let me see where to start. I might want to start here. It's got 9 upvotes. Your upvotes really influenced what I chose to answer this time. I chose the more popular ones. But this one is, we are told a lot. This is not the most popular one, but it's got 9 upvotes. So we are told a lot about what the utopian perspective is not. And it is talked about negatively throughout this reading. But we're not told exactly what the utopian perspective is. Can we get a full understanding of what that side is? Great question, and it allows me to go to sort of talk a little bit about this, these great debates, right? So international relations, the history or the development of the study of international relations is often said to sort of be constituted of 3 great debates. The first one is the one that you're sort of seeing the one half of, right? So the 3 great debates, you've got realism versus utopianism, okay? After that, you've got, we won't cover the other ones very much in this class, but we'll have behavioralism versus sort of philosophical, historical analysis. And then the third one is positivism versus post-positivism. And we might mention that one a little bit. That's the more recent one. But the interesting thing about the first one, so the ones who are supposed to have won, certainly the first 2, right, is realism and behavioralism. They're sort of taken as the winners of those first 2 great debates. So if we go back to realism and utopianism, actually the only thing we really see, the only place where we see the word or hear the word utopianism is in realist literature, right? So utopianism, there probably wasn't a lot of people going around saying, "Hi, I'm a utopian." What utopianism was a sort of a construct of the realists, right? A construct they sort of breathe life themselves into this opposition, right? Into this group, this utopian group, which they are against. And you can see if you read E.H. Carr, he names some utopians, some people that he considers utopians. Of course, they wouldn't themselves consider themselves utopians. And so then it's kind of hard to answer this question in some ways. I mean, I'll have a bit of a go of answering it in the spirit that it was asked. But before I do, I just want to make that clear that utopianism, it's important to the history of international relations, but it does seem like it was made up by the realists to sort as a foil, right? To sort of explain what they are not, which is why you sort of see it defined very negatively in the reading, right? Because it's sort of a construct that allows realists to define themselves. Really good question. Let me have a little bit of a go at the utopian perspective, but let me say when I do that, I'm only really constructing this perspective that I'm about to give you from the realist writers, right? But when realists talk about utopians, they mean this. They mean actually we can think of Wilson. President Wilson is oftentimes, I think he's named by E.H. Carr. The idea is for a utopian, it's somebody in the context of international relations. It's somebody that has an idea about how the world should be. This is how laws between nations should work. This is how relations between nations should work. And we have utopians. We as utopians, we have some sort of set of universal morals. And we know what's right and wrong. And so what we'll do is we'll take those principles of right and wrong, those principles of those moral principles, and we'll create a world based on those moral principles. So we'll create a more harmonious world, which will involve peace, right? War is probably bad for utopians. Peace is good. Maybe for some utopians, certain wars and certain circumstances can be good. But the idea is, and this is the distinction that the realists want to make, right? The idea is for utopians, they have ideas, they have grand ideas in their mind that they think up intellectually and that are morally sound, and then they implement that in the world. And what a realist wants to say is, hey, we do the opposite thing. Instead of coming up with the theory ourselves in our minds, coming up with instead of moving from a set of universal, maybe divinely given moral principles, we just look at how the world really is. We look how the world really is, and then we define our theories from that. We derive our theories from what's real and what's really happening in the world. So you'll see a lot, especially in the E.H. Carr piece in our book, but in probably Morgenthau as well, you'll see that they're attacking this idea of universal morality that they impute to the utopians, and E.H. Carr saying, look, the way that we know if something's right or not is that it succeeds, right? And that's the sort of might is right sort of an argument. If I think he says this, right? He says if the American founders, the founding fathers, I think it's E.H. Carr that says this. If the founding father, and he's British, right? So you've got to be suspicious of him when he starts to say this. But he says, if the founding fathers had lost the Revolutionary War, they would have just appeared in history. They would have appeared in history as these great moral heroes. No, they would have appeared as some sort of temporary, brigands who appeared as some sort of terrorists. I think he uses the word terrorists, right? Who pop up out of nowhere and are righteously defeated by the good guys, right? The British. So we know if something's good or not, if something was right, if it succeeds, and if it fails, then it was wrong. And so that's what realists want to say. They want to say, look, we're the ones who take that view, right? That we're looking at what's happening in the world, what's making sense in the world, and we're deriving our theory from that. We're not coming up with a theory ourselves, intellectualizing, and then trying to make the world like that. That's it in a nutshell. There you go. But again, there might not have been many people who thought of themselves as utopians per se. Carrying on with this, I'm going to go to the most popular question. It got by far the most upvotes. It got 37 upvotes at the time that I'm looking at it. Is it possible for a realist to also be a moralist if power is the primary interest motive behind their ideology? Or does realism encompass other theories, such as moralism and ethics, in its own way? So I want to answer that a little bit. First of all, I think, given the answer that I just gave, it kind of applies to this question too. Right, morals, universal morality, realists tend to steer clear of it. The might makes right. That's a very I suppose an essential realist characteristic, right? That you think that, right? If you think might makes right, if it succeeds, what does it say? Nothing succeeds like success. If it happens, then we can figure out why that was the right thing. We can figure out why that was the moral thing. So morality is definitely, for realists, is definitely subjugated to like actual events, I suppose, to power. Power is the primary interest motive behind, I'd say, I don't know if ideology is quite the right word there, but behind their theory, they want to understand the world, right? And they want to be able to even predict what's going to happen, right? So one of the principles that they think is true, right, from their observations, what they claim to be their observations, one of the things that they think is true is that states are interested in power, right? And so if we try to predict the actions of states, what we'll do is we'll look, will this move, will this this policy, this foreign policy, will it increase their power? Or you can get into like, do they think it will increase their power, right? And if it will increase their power, or if you think that they think, right, and then it starts to go down and down and down, that'll increase their power, then that's what they'll do. And if there's some sort of policy that is likely to decrease their power, they won't do that, right? So that helps you to predict. What they're trying to do is to say, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether that's the right way to live or the wrong way to live, that's what they'll do. So that's what we'll assume that they're going to do, and so we'll act accordingly. When they're talking perhaps to their statesmen, right? maybe realist academics are talking to American foreign policy makers. Sometimes those people cross over, are interchangeable, but when they're talking, they will give advice based on what is going to increase American power, and what is there's different types of realists. Some think that states should just amass as much power as humanly possible, and carry on increasing their power. That you're never safe enough, right? That you've never got enough power. And some realists think, no, at some point you've got enough power and you don't need to worry about getting more power. You're already the most powerful by far. Let's say, you don't have to worry about increasing your power at that point. But it is very much focused on power, because power is the ability to survive. It's the ability to survive, basically, in the international system, which is anarchic. And we can't rely on other states. If you're a realist, we can't rely too much on what other people say they're going to do. Ultimately, it's a war, like Hobbes says, a war of every man against every man, or every state against every state. And the only thing that guarantees our survival is if we amass power. So the morality of it, is interesting. So there is some sort of a morality of state. I think it's Carr in there. It might be Morgenthau, but it's one of those. Check back. Who hints at this? But I've had it developed, I think, somewhere else. That. It might be moral. This is Morgenthau. Anyway, it might be moral for individuals to sort of sacrifice themselves for the greater good, for some sort of moral cause. That might be the right thing for individuals to do, but for states, it's never the right thing to do. Right? States should never sacrifice themselves for any sort of morality, right? Because states are ensuring that the safety, perhaps, and the freedom, but it's the security that realists are interested in. The security of the people that live there in the state. States have to are responsible for that, so they can't sacrifice their own security because they're doing it on behalf of somebody else. Right? It's okay to sacrifice yourself, but it's not okay to sacrifice other people, right? For a moral cause. That's usually, I guess, so there is some sort of morality there in realism. But the morality is certainly secondary to power, and the idea is that the moral thing to do is to increase your power at the cost of other states on behalf of your own people, and not to sacrifice their interests to the benefit of another state. So there is some sort of a morality there, but it's a different and it's subjugated to power. The second most popular question, it's in the realist category, and we've got what. They should almost all be realist categories, but this is the category that I got flagged from Beagle. What I'm gathering from the reading is that a political realist believes in order to gain control, they must do it through power. That being said, what is the opposite of a political realist? And do they believe in control through peace? Is there a middle ground belief where it's a complete 50-50 balance of power and peace? Good question. You're anticipating liberalism. And liberals are not really against amassing power either. But some of the assumptions that they make about the international system make it so that power comes maybe in different ways, and also is not absolutely as essential as it is for realists. So we'll see as we move on to liberalism, we'll see that liberals are a little bit more optimistic about the ability of states to live in anarchy or to mitigate the anarchy. Right? And so we'll see things like international organizations where we're trying to make agreements, right? International law, where we're trying to set morality and standards. Don't mistake liberals with utopians. Liberals really exist. I'm not sure utopians ever did exist, but there is a possibility of confusing liberals and utopians. And in fact, for some realists, liberals might be all the old utopians coming back. But liberals try consciously not to be utopians, right? So they accept a lot of realist assumptions about, we're going to look at the world as it really is. We accept that we have an anarchic international system, but we think that if we're liberals, and we'll see this, we think that anarchy, we don't just have to amass power to survive in that anarchy. We can sort of mitigate the anarchy. We can tone down the anarchy a bit by just talking to each other. Right, talking to each other. Let's set up some institutions. Let's make promises to each other that we won't attack one another and that will cooperate in, in trade or in, let's make those sorts of promises. And yeah, liberals are confident that we can keep promises, and our friends will keep promises to us, and we'll be able that way to make it so that power isn't the necessary. We don't have to just rely on our own power and strength to keep ourselves safe. We can rely on other things as well. So that doesn't get rid of power entirely, right? It's not like a sort of a you have, I think, in the question, like a power and peace on two separate sides. And I think that's you'd want to be careful with that. One of the things is, like, in some realist theory, right? If you have one state with a preponderance of power, or actually for Ken Waltz, if you have two big blocks with all of the power, that can actually lead to peace, right? So power doesn't necessarily take away from peace. Power might be a prerequisite for peace. Ultimately, right, we're talking about power in order to influence security, and what's more secure than being able to live in peace, right? So I wouldn't put those as oppositions at all. And I think while realists have this strong self-reliance, we've got to have as much power as we can to survive. Liberals don't put as much emphasis on power and think that we can survive in other ways as well through cooperation, which is much more hard for realists to accept. All right, finally then on this one, 22 upvotes, a question about Hobbes. I found the language in Thomas Hobbes' reading difficult to follow. It was written about 500 years ago, so that's fair enough. Am I correct in understanding the premise that men are naturally inclined to satisfy their own desires, which makes them constantly at war with each other, so it's the government's job to prevent them from acting on their disagreements? Yes, pretty much. I'd say that's Leviathan in a nutshell. The reason why it's important for realists, the reason why it's important for international relations, is that there is no world government, right? So we look at Thomas Hobbes' state of nature, where it's a war of all against all, every man against every other man. If they want something, they go and take it. There's nobody if they can, they'll take what they can get, and that for realists is the international system. Right? There's no government in the international system. There's no overarching government that can say, if let's say if Russia invade Ukraine, which of course they never did, right? But if Russia did invade Ukraine, if they had invaded, there's no international government that can punish, that can come and put Russia in jail or something, right? If I came and, let's not make it that personal, right? But if some people on my street, if one person, my next door neighbour, went to the other neighbour and attacked them and sort of took part of their house away, we would call the police, right? And the police would come, and they would come with their weapons, and they would take the aggressor away, and there'd be a trial, and if they were found to have broken the law, which likely they would in those circumstances, they would be put in prison and punished, right? And they'd have to give back that part of the house, of course, that they've taken away, and there would be other punishments as well. That doesn't exist in the international system for realists. For liberals, we'll see that maybe something like that might exist, but not for realists. It doesn't exist. And so you've got to take what you can get. And so it resembles then Thomas Hobbes' state of nature, which, as you're right, men are naturally inclined to satisfy their own desires. States are naturally satisfied to just inclined just to survive, and to survive by all means possible, even if that includes war with their neighbours. And because of a lack of overarching government in the international system, that's why realists sort of draw from Hobbes an example of the international system. All right, I'm going to stop this video here, but I'm going to make another one for the next group of questions that'll deal more with the second group of readings. But hopefully I know that some of the things I've said will help you with the quiz, but nothing will help you with the quiz like reading those readings. All of the answers are taken from the readings, and so we've definitely discussed some of the answers to the questions, but there's a lot that we haven't. So, all right, I'm going to pop over to the other video now.